Mike Reynolds had lived in Ridgepoint Estates for just under a year. A clean community with trimmed hedges, quiet streets, and a board of retirees who took neighborhood policy more seriously than national law. He didn't come for luxury, he came for peace, especially for his son Tyler. Tyler wasn't like most kids, diagnosed with autism at age 6. He preferred building things over playing with others. He rarely raised his voice and often carried his sketchbook around like armor. That summer, father and son built a small wooden tree house in their backyard. No Wi-Fi, no screens, just nails, pine wood, and memories. It wasn't tall, wasn't painted, and certainly wasn't loud. But it was Tyler's. Mike hadn't even poured his morning coffee when he heard the knock. It wasn't a friendly one. Karen Whitmore stood on his porch, HOA badge swinging round her neck like it had federal weight. Her voice was flat and formal. She didn't ask if Mike was new. She didn't welcome him. She simply said the treehouse needed to be removed. Mike looked at her, confused. She held out a paper from a folder with the words non-compliant structure notification. Her eyes never left the top step where Tyler was now sitting, sketching a bird in the tree. Mike kept his voice even, told her it was temporary, assured her it was within the lot. But Karen cut him off with one phrase: "This neighborhood doesn't need distractions." That's when he realized she wasn't talking about the treehouse. She was talking about his son. He watched her walk back to her home across the street. Something cold settled in Mike's stomach. Not fear, not even anger, just the kind of stillness that happens before a storm. The next morning, his mailbox was stuffed with 3 new notices. One about unauthorized exterior modification, one about landscaping nonconformity, and one that stated his child had been seen disturbing communal wildlife. Tyler had drawn a chalk butterfly on the sidewalk. Mike didn't say anything to Tyler. He smiled, gave him a sandwich, and let him read on the deck. But he took photos of everything, every paper, every timestamp, every inch of the treehouse, and uploaded them to a folder titled Insurance. There were no raised voices, no broken fences, just the quiet, slow unraveling of something Mike had tried very hard to protect: his son's joy and his right to keep it. If Karen thought he would just cave in, she hadn't done her homework. The next night, a white envelope appeared on Mike's windshield. No return address. Inside was a printed photo of Tyler climbing the treehouse with a red X over it. That was the moment everything changed, and Mike began planning something Karen wasn't ready for. 2 days passed, and the treehouse stood quietly under the maple tree. Mike made no changes. Tyler spent his afternoons there, reading books about birds and scribbling maps in his sketchpad. It was the calm before something darker. Though nobody saw it coming, Karen didn't knock again. Instead, she sent a letter, a formal one, this time with a stamped HOA seal and official-looking language, all uppercase and bold where it counted. The letter claimed the treehouse posed a safety risk, cited an unauthorized structure elevation, and gave him a 10-day deadline for full removal. Mike didn't blink. He'd already measured the structure's height and confirmed it was under the township's legal limit. He knew Karen had no real power to enforce anything beyond grass length and mailbox color. But this wasn't about rules, it was about control, and Tyler had become her target. Mike decided to attend the next HOA board meeting not to argue, but to document. He brought a voice recorder and sat quietly in the back. Wearing a navy cap and a blank expression, Karen stood at the front of the room, flanked by 3 other board members who nodded like bobbleheads. Every time she spoke, she opened the meeting with a complaint in written and unannounced about recent unsanctioned child structures drawing unwanted attention to private residences. The words were wrapped in careful language. She never said Mike's name, never said treehouse outright, but her gaze flickered once to the back of the room right at him. After the meeting, Mike waited for the board to file out. One member, a younger woman named Rachel Lynn, stopped to whisper something to him on her way to the exit. She spoke fast, almost nervously. "She's trying to build a case, wants to classify your treehouse as a hazard. I think she's pushing it too far." Then she walked out before he could ask more. Mike sat in his car for a long time, staring at the dashboard. His hands clenched the steering wheel as pieces of a larger plan began falling into place. This wasn't about a neighborhood. It wasn't even about HOA pride. This was about Karen needing control over something, anything, and his quiet son had become her way of proving she still had it. 3 days later, the first neighborhood notice went out. A printed bulletin left at every front door with a header titled Community Safety Initiative. It warned of unsecured child play installations and asked residents to report non-conforming builds in backyards. It even included an anonymous hotline. Tyler didn't know. Mike didn't tell him. The boy had enough trouble navigating the world without worrying about who was watching from behind their curtains. So Mike smiled and told him the birds in the tree were goldfinches. Then he took out his phone and started recording again. That night, the anonymous tip line got its first real call. Not from Karen, from Mike. He disguised his voice, played dumb, and asked about a structure in a backyard his nephew built. The operator fumbled, said the number was voluntary, and that reports would be reviewed by board members before action. So it was all run by Karen. No formal agency, no oversight. Mike didn't get angry. He got smarter. He installed a new motion-activated camera by the maple tree. When they uploaded footage to a private cloud, then he left a note on the treehouse door that said, "Smile for the camera, not for Karen," just in case someone else tried to take matters into their own hands. The following Saturday, Tyler invited a classmate over, just one, a quiet boy named Eli. They played with walkie-talkies and made paper parachutes to drop from the treehouse roof. Karen called the cops. Mike heard the sirens before he saw them. 2 patrol cars pulled up slowly. Officers stepped out casually. Confused, one of them, Delgado, recognized Mike from years back. They shook hands. Delgado looked at the treehouse, then at the kids, then at Karen, who had come marching out of her garage with a plastic folder of photos. She told dispatch it was a safety hazard. Delgado said quietly. Mike nodded, calm as always. "Everything's recorded. Want to see?" Delgado declined. "You're good, Mike. Just keep an eye out. She's not done." Karen stood nearby, right in the face, clutching her folder like it held evidence of a felony. When the officers left, without taking action, she stared at the treehouse with something that wasn't anger, it was humiliation. That was the moment Mike knew she would escalate. Not through the board, not through letters. She would go after Tyler directly, and the next time she did, she'd regret it. A week passed. Ridgepoint Estates looked normal on the outside, fresh-cut lawns, smiling joggers, weekend cookouts. But underneath, something was shifting. Karen's crusade against the Reynolds family wasn't losing steam, it was just changing shape. Mike knew she'd try again, but he didn't expect her to involve Tyler so directly. It started small. Little things. Tyler's sidewalk chalk drawings were hosed off by someone overnight. A neighborhood boy whispered that his mom told him not to play with the kid who makes people call the cops. A trash bin that had always been near the curb was suddenly overturned every Tuesday morning. Mike said nothing. He documented everything. But Tyler noticed the change. His smile faded. He stayed indoors more, sketching in silence, glancing toward the treehouse like it was something he used to dream about, but no longer trusted. Then came Saturday. Mike had errands. Normally, he'd take Tyler with him. But that morning his son was finally in a good mood. He asked to stay behind, said he wanted to finish a drawing of a hawk they'd seen last week. Mike hesitated, then agreed. The cameras were rolling, the neighbors were out. It was safe. He left for the store at 10:15. By 10:45, Karen made her move. She waited until no one was in direct view, only one older man down the block mowing his lawn. Then she walked across the street, leash in one hand, her dog in tow. The dog, a yappy white terrier named Muffin, began barking as they approached the fence. Tyler, hearing the noise, climbed down from the treehouse and stepped to the gate. That's When Karen shouted, "You're not allowed to be in that thing without supervision," Tyler, confused, tried to explain his dad was nearby and the cameras were on. Karen pushed the gate open anyway. The dog ran in barking wildly, circling Tyler's legs. He backed up, stumbling slightly. Karen followed the dog, yelling something about HOA violation protocols and citing imaginary code numbers. Tyler tried stepping away, but she grabbed his arm hard, the same arm that had a small scar from a childhood accident. He yanked free and fell back against the gravel edge lining the treehouse foundation. His elbow slammed against a wooden beam. He screamed. That scream echoed down the block and was caught on 3 different cameras including Mike's, which uploaded live footage to his phone. The alert buzzed in his pocket while he stood in line at the hardware store. When he looked at the screen, his stomach dropped. He dropped everything and ran. Back at the house, the scream had already drawn neighbors to their porches. Rachel Lynn stepped outside in time to see Karen shouting at Tyler to stop crying and act normal. Tyler was curled on the grass, clutching his elbow, his sketch pad bent beneath him. Rachel called 911 when Mike's truck screeched into the driveway 6 minutes later. 2 neighbors were crouched beside Tyler, trying to comfort him. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, saying it was a misunderstanding. Mike didn't speak. He knelt next to his son. Tyler was shaking, whispering that he didn't mean to fall, that he didn't want to get anyone in trouble. Mike looked up at Karen, who met his gaze like nothing had happened. Then he pulled out his phone, not to call, just to tap a button on his screen. The footage played, sound and all, for every neighbor around to hear. The yelling, the dog, the arm grab, the scream. Karen's face drained of color. The ambulance arrived 5 minutes later. Tyler was taken to the hospital with a dislocated elbow, nothing broken. But the trauma was real. He barely spoke the entire ride back at Ridge Point. As the sirens faded, Karen tried explaining to the neighbors that she was just trying to help, but nobody nodded this time. Even Muffin looked embarrassed. Rachel waited until everyone cleared out before walking over to Mike's porch. She said something she'd been holding back for weeks. "She's obsessed with power, Mike, and she's not done until someone stops her." He nodded. She just made that a whole lot easier. What Karen didn't know yet was that Mike had already contacted a lawyer. And thanks to Rachel, he'd soon have more than footage. He'd have her own board turning against her. She crossed a line that morning. She didn't just break a rule. She gave Mike everything he needed. And the fallout was about to begin. Tyler was released from the hospital later that evening. His elbow was immobilized, and he barely made eye contact. The silence wasn't unusual for him, but the fear behind it was. Mike tucked him into bed, switched off the light, and stood in the hallway just listening. No sound, no pages turning, no whispers. It felt like the heartbeat of the house had gone still. He stepped into his office, opened the cloud archive, and downloaded the footage from that morning. Then he opened a folder labeled HOA Karen and dragged the file in. It joined dozens of other clips, scanned documents, HOA bulletins, and screenshots, each one a thread in the story Karen had been weaving for weeks, except now. The threads were unraveling. Mike didn't want revenge. He wanted a permanent end to her interference, an end that would last long after her clipboard and little HOA badge lost meaning. But to do that, he needed more than a single clip of misconduct. He needed a pattern, and he needed the board to feel cornered enough to act without giving her time to bury the truth. Rachel Lynn was already ahead of him. She showed up the next morning with a flash drive, no makeup, and fury in her eyes. "She doesn't know I kept these," she said, handing it to Mike. "Emails, internal memos, even a voice note she sent me last month." Mike plugged it in, and his face stayed calm. But his fingers stilled when he opened one particular file, a voice recording labeled Tyler_obstacle. He hit play. Karen's voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm telling you, Rachel, the kid's a liability. I don't care what disability laws say. He's unpredictable. And that structure, look at it, it's like a jungle gym for a lawsuit." Rachel looked away while it played. I stayed quiet for too long, she muttered. I didn't think she'd actually put hands on a kid. Mike clicked through the rest of the drive. Dozens of emails showed Karen targeting other families to mostly young ones, especially those with kids who played outside or painted fences bright colors. It was about control, about stamping out anything that didn't fit her shrinking world. By noon, Mike had everything compiled. He didn't go to the police, not yet. He knew that once this became a legal matter, Karen would double down. So he took a quieter route. He sent a Dropbox link to every HOA board member, including Karen. No message, no warning, just the files. Then he waited. That evening, the Ridgepoint community from a private app only residents use lit up like a bonfire. Someone anonymously posted a clip of Karen grabbing Tyler's arm. Then came a screenshot of the Tyler_obstacle audio file. Then came outrage. Mike didn't comment. He let the story speak for itself. By sunset, Rachel called him. They're calling an emergency board session tomorrow at 10. Mike didn't ask for details. He just thanked her. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen's porch light didn't turn on that night. Her flagpole was bare for the first time in a year. No dog barks, no blinds shifting. But Mike noticed a car slowly rolling past his house twice. Black sedan, no stickers, and it stopped just long enough to make a man like Mike notice. He jotted the plates down out of habit. The next morning, while Ridgepoint slept late on a Sunday, Karen arrived at the HOA meeting 15 minutes early, armed with a binder and wearing her usual navy jacket. She walked in with her usual stride. But something was different. No one stood when she entered. Rachel and two other board members were seated, calm, poised. And Karen knew the minute the door closed. The balance had tipped. Rachel opened a laptop, turned it toward Karen, and hit play. It was the audio clip. Karen's face froze. Where did you get that? She demanded. It doesn't matter, Rachel said. You crossed a line. Karen looked around. But no one came to her defense. You think you can just turn on me? I built this board from scratch. I kept this place livable. You kept it silent, one member replied. Now we're done being quiet. Karen stood. You'll regret this. But no one moved. Mike wasn't there. He didn't need to be. He already knew how this part would end. He just didn't know that Karen wasn't finished yet. The emergency board meeting ended without fireworks. But the silence was sharper than a siren. Karen walked out without saying a word, clutching her binder like it could shield her from what she'd just heard. 3 board members had turned on her, officially filing a motion to remove her as president, pending a vote in 48 hours. But Karen wasn't known for taking losses quietly. Mike was in the backyard with Tyler the next morning when he noticed the flyers, neatly folded, wrapped in rubber bands, and dropped at every doorstep on the block. Tyler picked one up and handed it to his father. The headline read, "The Truth About the Reynolds Family. What Your Horror Won't Tell You." Below it was a carefully manipulated set of images, blurry screenshots of the treehouse, out of context camera angles that made Tyler look like he was unsupervised for hours, and even a few doctored HOA documents that claimed Mike had multiple unresolved violations. There was no author listed, but no one needed a signature to know who sent them. Mike stared at the flyer, then looked at his son. Tyler's eyes were wide. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Mike crouched beside him and shook his head slowly. "No, you didn't." But inside, a fuse had lit. He knocked on Rachel's door 20 minutes later. She opened it, already holding one of the flyers. "She's desperate," she said. "We've seen this before. But this is something else." Mike's voice was calm, but his hands weren't. "I need the community vote, and I need people to see her for who she is." Rachel nodded. "You'll get it. But you should know she's trying to call in favors. Some of the older residents think she's being attacked unfairly." Mike glanced back at his house, where Tyler was drawing on the porch with his one good arm. She put her hands on Mike. And now she's trying to ruin him with paper. Rachel looked down, ashamed. Some people don't need power. They need someone to stop pretending they deserve it. That night, Mike took a risk. He posted the full video and edited from the backyard camera to the Ridgepoint Community Forum. No caption, no context, just the truth. It spread faster than wildfire. Some residents were horrified, others tried to defend Karen, saying the video could be misleading, that kids are fragile these days, or that it was blown out of proportion. But the replies beneath those comments stacked quickly. A mother whose daughter had been reprimanded for playing hopscotch. A retired veteran who said Karen had once called the city over his American flag. A couple who moved out 2 years earlier. Because of the relentless letters, the neighborhood wasn't defending her anymore. It was waking up. Karen must have known. Because the next morning, she marched down the street with muffin in one hand and a stack of new notices in the other. She knocked on 5 doors. Only one opened, and even they shut it halfway through her speech. Mike didn't engage. He just watched from behind the blinds. But Karen wasn't done. At 3 p.m., the HOA inbox received an anonymous submission, a complaint claiming Mike's backyard camera violated privacy ordinances. Within 10 minutes, 5 other nearly identical complaints came in, all sent from different email addresses, but with the same writing style. Rachel called him again. She's trying to bury the evidence under a technicality. Mike smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. He replied, let her try. The next evening, a vote was held. 73% of homeowners submitted ballots. Karen wasn't invited to the boardroom where they were counted, but she showed up anyway, standing outside the community hall. Arms folded as neighbors walked past her without a glance. When the results were announced, she didn't flinch. She was officially removed as HOA president, effective immediately. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just turned, got into her car, and drove off with Muffin whining softly in the passenger seat. Mike stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching. He knew it wasn't over. She wasn't the type to fade out. She was the type to plan her next move with a grin. And somewhere deep down, Mike felt it. She was already working on it. The week after Karen's removal was eerily calm. Ridgepoint Estates carried on like the drama had passed through and left peace in its wake. Sprinklers clicked on in the mornings. Kids rode their bikes without side eyes from across the street, and the bulletin board outside the clubhouse finally displayed something cheerful. A fall harvest flyer. But Mike knew better. He didn't trust silence. Not in a neighborhood where secrets traveled faster than sirens. Tyler was healing. The swelling in his elbow had gone down, and he'd started spending time in the treehouse again, just long enough to draw before heading inside. Mike didn't pressure him. He let the quiet return naturally, like a bird cautiously returning to a branch after a storm. Then the letter arrived. Not a flyer, not a printed HOA notice, a real letter mailed through the post, addressed to Mike's full name. No return address, no signature inside. It simply read, you may have taken my title, but you didn't take the board. Mike stared at the words, printed in a sharp serif font like a legal document, cold, direct, and terrifyingly honest. He called Rachel. She answered on the first ring. I got one too, she said, except mine says, hope you like being interim, because I still pulled the strings. Rachel had spoken to 3 other board members, 2 of whom admitted they'd received texts from Karen urging them to block a proposed neighborhood policy that would formally ban personal contact between board members and residents' children. Mike had suggested the policy just days earlier. It was symbolic, sure, but it was also necessary. Karen saw it as a message, and she didn't like messages that didn't come from her. Mike asked Rachel how she still had influence. That's the part we missed, she replied. She set this place up like a puppet show. She didn't just run the board, she owned the fine print. It turned out Karen had rewritten portions of the HOA bylaws during her presidency, small clauses, buried under vague language, that gave past board members consulting privileges and rights to review policy votes if they involve safety or appearance standards. Nobody had noticed it because no one ever questioned her before. She didn't just step down. She slipped behind the curtain and stayed there, pulling levers while everyone thought the stage was empty. Mike opened the HOA's digital archive, scanned the bylaws, and saw it for himself. Article 12, Section D titled, innocuously, Historical, Oversight Provisions. Her fingerprints were all over it. At the next board meeting, Rachel brought it up for appeal. Karen wasn't in the room, but her ghost was. Two board members, men who had voted to remove her, now voted against repealing the clause. They claimed it was tradition, that it preserved the wisdom of the board's legacy. Mike didn't need a translator to hear Karen's voice in their mouths. And then came the twist. Rachel received a forwarded email from a neighbor named Melinda Nurse who lived 5 doors down from Karen. She'd gotten an anonymous message offering to assist with neighborhood landscaping fees in exchange for supporting a complaint about Mike's surveillance cameras. The cameras that had filmed Karen grabbing Tyler. Karen wasn't finished. She was trying to flip the script, make Mike the problem, and erase the reason he ever installed the cameras to begin with. That same day, the HOA inbox received a new batch of resident concerns about the treehouse, not the structure. This time, they claimed the children climbing it could attract lawsuits and posed a shared liability to the community. Mike wasn't shocked, but this time, he was ready. He'd already spoken to an attorney, not for a lawsuit yet, but for a legal breakdown of every bylaw Karen had manipulated. They found something. A provision in the state HOA regulation statute. Any rule added without proper notification and 75% approval could be nullified by resident petition. Karen had never held a vote for Article 12, Section D. It meant every power she claimed she still had she never legally owned. But Mike wasn't going to announce it yet. He wanted her to step deeper into her game, just far enough to make one final mistake. The kind that wouldn't just take her out of the HOA. It would take her out of the neighborhood altogether. Karen didn't know she'd already lost. She thought the game was still hers to play, that the bylaws she buried in fine print, the favors she whispered into weak spines, the fear she built with fake letters and public shame, they were still enough to hold Ridgepoint Estates under her thumb. But Mike was 3 moves ahead, and the neighborhood was quietly shifting its weight. Tyler hadn't gone back to the treehouse in 2 days. Not since a stranger posing as a maintenance worker had wandered too close and stared too long. Mike reviewed the footage and flagged the man's face. It wasn't anyone from the HOA's list of contractors. It wasn't anyone local. Karen had begun recruiting shadows. Rachel called that same night. Her voice was tense. She's setting something up. I can feel it. One of the board members told me she's been drafting a child endangerment complaint and wants it read aloud at the next meeting. Mike didn't flinch. Let her, he said. She's about to bury herself. 2 days later, the board meeting opened like any other. Half the room was filled with curious neighbors, the other half with tired ones. Karen walked in 5 minutes late, not as a member, but as a resident consultant. She wore a peach suit jacket, her dog Muffin in her lap like a fashion accessory. Mike sat in the back, calm, sullen. Rachel opened the floor. Karen stood immediately and, with all the authority she could scrape together, began reading from a sheet of paper. Her voice was slow and steady. She spoke of safety, of irresponsible parenting, of structures placed in full view of children who may not understand risks. She never said Tyler's name, but she didn't have to. The room was quiet, but not with agreement. It was the quiet of discomfort. Then she made her mistake. She held up a photo. An edited picture of Tyler in the treehouse with a red circle drawn around his face. This, she said, is the risk we must address. That's when Rachel stood. That's enough. Karen looked stunned. I'm not finished. But Rachel took the photo from her hand and turned it toward the crowd. Does this look like concern to anyone here? Or does it look like a woman targeting a child? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the murmurs in the room had already begun. That's when Mike stood. He walked slowly to the front, handed Rachel a thick envelope. and turned to the crowd. I've been quiet long enough, but if we're going to talk about risk, we should talk about truth. Rachel opened the envelope and pulled out documents copies of the state's HOA oversight law. Documentation proving Karen's bylaw amendments were made without legal process, and a signed statement from a real estate lawyer confirming that Article 12, Section D was void under state code. Then came the petition, signed by over 70% of Ridgepoint's homeowners, demanding the complete removal of all illegal provisions introduced by Karen Whitmore, including her role as a resident consultant. Karen stepped forward, her face flashed. "This is fraud. You don't understand the law." Rachel cut her off. "We understand it now." Then she handed Karen an envelope of her own. "You are officially banned from serving in any HOA capacity, and your privileges to attend board meetings are suspended pending legal review of harassment claims filed by multiple residents." Karen stared, breathless. "You can't do this. This is my neighborhood." Mike finally spoke. Not loud, not angry. "It stopped being yours the minute you laid hands on my kid." The room fell into a hush. Karen didn't argue. She just stood there for a moment, dog trembling in her arms, eyes flicking from face to face, and realized she didn't see a single ally. She turned, walked out, and didn't look back. But the story wasn't quite over. As Mike walked back to his seat, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. No voicemail. An hour later, a letter was hand-delivered to his front door. It was from Karen's attorney. Inside was a single sentence: "We are preparing legal action for defamation, privacy invasion, and targeted harassment." Mike read it once, set it down, and turned to Tyler, who was now laughing in the treehouse again with two other boys. And then Mike smiled. Karen had made her final move, but she had no idea the counterstrike had already begun. Mike didn't panic when the legal notice came. In fact, he welcomed it. A letter from Karen's attorney wasn't an act of strength. It was a scream from a woman who had run out of weapons. Her claim accused him of defamation, privacy invasion, and what she called emotional targeting. Mike scanned the letter, then passed it to his attorney, who laughed and slid it into a folder labeled counterclaims. But the real blow didn't come from court. It came from something much simpler. That weekend, Ridgepoint Estates held its annual Fall Community Festival. Popcorn machines, face painting, a dunk tank. Rachel organized it. She made sure Tyler and Mike had a booth selling small wood crafts Tyler had built himself, handmade bird houses, tree house keychains, and a few paintings of hawks and owls. It wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a statement. Karen wasn't invited, but she came anyway. She showed up with her usual polished smile, her dog tucked under her arm like a designer purse, and sunglasses too large for her face. A few people nodded politely. Most avoided eye contact. Then, as Mike helped Tyler set up his display, someone tapped his shoulder. It was Rachel. "You should probably see what just went live." She handed him her phone. A video was playing. Someone from the last board meeting had recorded the entire moment. Karen held up Tyler's photo, and Rachel's response, the confrontation, the petition, the vote, all of it. It had been posted to a local Facebook group by a parent who'd watched it unfold. Within minutes, it was shared across community forums and neighborhood apps. The caption read, "This is what power abuse looks like in Ridgepoint. Don't let your kid be next." Karen's voice echoed in the video, cold and detached. "This is the risk we must address." But it wasn't just neighbors watching. The story spread beyond the gates of Ridgepoint. A small regional blog picked it up. Then a parenting podcaster posted the video. And before the sun went down, Karen's face was circulating across horror watchdog groups nationwide. By the time she reached the kettle corn stand, phones were buzzing all around her. She knew. And for the first time, her posture changed. Her shoulders drooped. Her pace slowed. She didn't speak to anyone, just clutched her dog tighter, turned, and walked back toward the exit without buying a thing. Rachel watched her go and said, "You think that's it?" Mike replied, "No. But I think she just realized she's not invisible anymore." The Real twist came 2 days later. Mike received a call not from Karen, not from the HOA, but from the city's zoning department. Apparently, a formal complaint had been filed about Karen's property, specifically about an unpermitted renovation she completed 2 years ago on her backyard pergola. According to the report, it extended 6 feet past allowable space. It was an anonymous complaint, but Mike had nothing to do with it. Turns out, neighbors talk when they're finally free to. And someone remembered Karen had once threatened to report their kids for selling lemonade just for being loud. The zoning violation triggered a city inspection. What followed was a chain reaction. The discovery of unpaid contractor fees, failure to follow drainage regulations, and most critically, an unauthorized removal of protected trees on community land. Karen had broken more than just social rules. Her lawyer went silent, and within a month, Karen received not 1 but 3 city fines, totaling over $8,000. She appealed. She lost. She listed her house 3 weeks later, and by the time the for sale sign hit the lawn, the neighbors barely looked up. Mike and Tyler didn't celebrate. They just sat under the maple tree one afternoon, watching two finches flutter around the tree house railing. "Will she come back?" Tyler asked quietly. Mike shook his head. "Not if she's smart." Tyler thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "I think I'll build a second level." And Mike just laughed. The HOA, it ran quieter now. Rachel was officially voted in as president. New rules were passed with real votes, real transparency, and real kindness. No more anonymous threats. No more paper wars. Just neighbors being neighbors. Again, and the treehouse, it stayed up. With a new sign at the top. "Welcome to base camp. All kids welcome." No Karens beyond this point. If you're still watching, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe someone tried to make you small, scare you quiet, or rewrite the truth. Don't let them. Because sometimes, it only takes one good parent to knock the whole crooked system down. And sometimes, the ambulance doesn't arrive for the victim, it arrives for the one who thought they'd never be caught.